Hello everyone. Today we'll analyze how Oreshnik destroyed a secret U.S. hub in Lviv. The victims were 120 NATO specialists. How the vaunted Patriot systems turned out to be useless against Russian hypersonic weapons. By the end, you'll understand the price of capturing the Mariner tanker, why the Pentagon is hiding the losses, and Moscow's new strategy. Stay until the end. There's a list of objects that could become the next targets. It's worth starting with the official part. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced a nighttime massive strike on important military objects on the territory of Ukraine. The announcement mentioned the use of high-precision, long-range weapons from land and sea, as well as the use of a medium-range hypersonic complex and strike drones. According to the agency, all declared targets were hit. The conciseness of the wording contrasts with the scale of the operation, which later became clear from open data and reports from military sources. According to sources in the Russian military bloc, preparations for this operation took about 2 days after the story, with the capture of the Mariner tanker and the detention of Russian citizens. In Moscow, this was perceived as a direct blow to Russian assets and a signal that the opponents were moving to a tougher line. The goal of the upcoming strike was to inflict maximum damage on Ukrainian military objects and, in parallel, to demonstrate capabilities to the United States. Translated from diplomatic language, this meant that the response would be quick, sensitive, and understandable to Washington. According to sources, the operation started at midnight. The first to rise were strategic bombers Tu-95MS. They launched long-range cruise missiles capable of traveling more than 5,000 kilometers. The main targets at this stage were large energy and transport hubs in the central and western regions of Ukraine, railway junctions, important bridges across major rivers, and key substations. In parallel, hundreds of Gurian-2 strike drones were launched from different directions. These devices fly at low altitudes, use the terrain, and thereby complicate the operation of radar stations. Their main task in this scheme is to overload the air defense system, force the expenditure of expensive interceptor missiles, and cover secondary targets while heavier weapons fly to the main objects. The second wave came around 3:20. Hypersonic Zircon missiles were launched from the frigate Admiral Gorshkov, which was located in the Barents Sea. Their speed is estimated at about 9 Mach, that is, up to 9,000 km/h. The flight time to the western regions of Ukraine at this pace is a matter of minutes. According to open sources, large ammunition depots, command posts, and airfields were hit. About a quarter of an hour later, around 3:45, the Kinzhal complex came into play. MiG-31 fighters from Russian airfields took the missiles to a height of more than 15 kilometers. After separation, the Kinzhal accelerates to hypersonic speed and can hit targets at a distance of up to 2,000 kilometers. Due to the enormous kinetic energy and mass of the warhead, such missiles are designed to hit especially protected objects, including those hidden under the ground and in rocky terrain. Military analysts note that it was not a single strike on individual warehouses, but a sequential, multi-level operation. First, cruise missiles and drones overloaded air defense, disabled radar, and transport hubs. Then hypersonic weapons, which existing interception systems can practically not stop, worked on the most important and protected targets. And while this combination was going on in the central and western regions of Ukraine, a key episode was unfolding on the other side of the country, in Lviv. This city in the west has long played the role of the main hub for Western aid to Ukraine. It is located approximately 70 kilometers from the border with Poland, that is, practically at the door of NATO countries. There are large warehouses, training centers, command and communications points through which the main flow of weapons from Europe to the front lines passes. According to Russian military intelligence, in one of the industrial zones on the northern outskirts of Lviv, there was a large center where supplies from Poland and the distribution of weapons to Ukrainian units were coordinated. Formally, this object was listed for Ukrainian structures, but control over key processes, according to the same information, was carried out by American military specialists. The object employed a unit of advisors and communications operators, estimated at approximately 150 people. It was this center, according to available reports, that received the status of a priority target for the new Russian medium-range complex called Oreshnik. At 4 a.m. Moscow time, the launch of a missile of this type was recorded from the Kapustin Yar training ground. The Oreshnik combat block is divided into several hypersonic gliding elements, each of which is capable of independently maneuvering and hitting its target. The flight time to Lviv, according to open estimates, was about 12 minutes. For current air defense systems, this is an extremely short period. It is necessary to detect the launch, classify the target, issue target designations, and launch interceptor missiles. In the case of hypersonic blocks that maneuver and are surrounded by a plasma shell, most radars operate at the limit of their capabilities. Eyewitness accounts from the northern outskirts of Lviv speak of a series of almost simultaneous explosions with minimal intervals. This pattern really looks like the work of a separating warhead. Each block, possessing enormous speed, inflicts damage due to kinetics, even in the absence of a particularly powerful combat charge. According to estimates cited by a number of sources, the logistics center was almost completely destroyed. Large warehouse hangars were destroyed. The administrative building with control and communications rooms was turned into a pile of rubble. As a result of the strike, according to various estimates, from several dozen to more than 100 people could have died, a significant part of whom were American military personnel. The exact figures have not yet been officially confirmed, but Western media and American experts admit that U.S. losses have been unprecedented in recent years. Military specialists were particularly interested in the characteristics of the Oreshnik itself. According to open estimates, its range of use is up to 5,500 kilom. The missile carries a multiple warhead with several hypersonic blocks. Each block is capable of maneuvering at high speed, which makes calculating the trajectory extremely difficult for the enemy. The time from detection of the start to the destruction of targets is 10 to 12 minutes, and this, according to experts, is not enough for a full-fledged organization of defense. For comparison, Zircon is a sea-based hypersonic cruise missile with a range of up to 1,000 kilom. It is launched from ships and submarines, hitting both surface and ground targets. A warhead of about 400 kilograms, combined with high speed, ensures the penetration of serious fortifications. Kinjal is an aviation complex, starting from a MiG-31 with a range of up to 2,000 kilometers and a warhead of about 500 kilograms, designed to hit protected objects. The Zoran-2 drone is a relatively low-power but mass-produced means. A range of up to 2,000 km, a warhead of about 50 kilosazon, and a low-altitude flight make it a convenient tool for overloading air defense. Analysts note that it was the combined use of such systems that created the effect when expensive air defense systems were forced to either remain silent or expend ammunition on secondary targets. Now to another topic that is closely related to this operation: the work of American Patriot complexes in the Ukrainian direction. In recent weeks, it was reported that Ukraine had received new batteries of these systems. Patriot has long been presented as one of the key pillars of protection for the most important objects. At the same time, military observers drew attention to the fact that there are practically no reports of fresh, successful interceptions with their help. Military correspondent of Komsomolskaya Pravda, Alexander Kotz, emphasized in his Telegram channel that there have been no official statements for a long time that these complexes shot down any significant targets. According to him, there are almost no convenient targets left for such an expensive and complex system now. Mass strikes are carried out by drones, and Russian aircraft drop adjustable aerial bombs from distances that the Patriot does not cover. In addition, the effectiveness of Patriot against ballistic and especially hypersonic targets raises questions among some experts. An important disadvantage of the complex is limited mobility. The battery needs to be moved regularly. Otherwise, due to the nature of the radar operation, Russian units quickly calculate the position and strike the radars. To disable such a system, it is enough to destroy its main radar. And the Russian side has repeatedly stated such episodes. And while Western supplies continue, new models of weapons appear on the Ukrainian side, which gradually lose the halo of a miracle cure. As observers note, over time, the same Patriot ended up in the same row with Turkish Bayraktar drones, Javelin anti-tank systems, and Abrams tanks. All these models can be dangerous, but they do not change the course of the company by themselves. Moreover, some of this equipment eventually falls into the hands of Russian units as trophies. During last year's battles in the Kursk region, when Ukrainian formations advanced into Russian territory and then hastily abandoned positions, several hundred units of Western equipment remained on this territory, according to Russian military sources. This is another touch to the question of how much the bet exclusively on external supplies determines the outcome of the confrontation. Let's go back to the operation itself. In addition to the strike on Lviv, the Russian side announced the destruction of a number of objects in the west and in the center of Ukraine. A large ammunition depot was destroyed in the Rivne region. According to reports, the detonation lasted several hours. A railway junction was disabled in Ternopil, which disrupted train traffic for some time. 3 bridges across the Western Bug River received serious damage, which complicated the transfer of military equipment and cargo from the territory of Poland. The airfield in Ivano-Frankivsk, according to Russian reports, was left with a damaged runway on which craters formed. In Zhytomyr, the command post of Ukrainian troops was hit by a direct hit from a Kinzhal-type missile. A large substation was destroyed in Khmelnytsky. Part of the city was temporarily left without light. If we summarize the data of the Russian military department, more than 150 military objects were hit. A significant part of the air defense system in the western regions of Ukraine was damaged or forced to change positions. The chains of transfer of troops and equipment from Poland were disrupted. The most sensitive moment for Ukraine's Western partners was the loss among their personnel. According to estimates by various analytical groups, the total losses of NATO from strikes on Lviv and other objects could amount to up to 200 people, including those killed and wounded. The main blow fell on American personnel in Lviv. We are talking about dozens of military personnel. It was also reported about the defeat of specialists from Poland, Great Britain, and Romania at other sites. For the United States, this is, in fact, the most serious loss from combat operations abroad since the operation in Afghanistan. It is important to emphasize that the strike on the object in Lviv, where American military personnel were stationed, does not look like an accidental hit. The Russian side, judging by the preparation and choice of means of destruction, understood who was at this site and consciously took the risk of a direct strike on the personnel of a country that is part of NATO. Military experts say that this takes the conflict to a new level, from indirect participation to a situation where the Western Bloc suffers direct damage from Russia's actions. The U.S. response followed quickly. The Pentagon issued a statement describing what happened as an unacceptable strike on an object where American citizens were located. The White House demanded that Russia stop attacks on the western regions of Ukraine and warned of possible serious consequences. The State Department summoned the Russian ambassador for explanations and consultations. At the same time, specialized American publications and experts note that a complex internal dilemma is hidden behind the tough rhetoric. On the one hand, the death of a significant number of military personnel requires a response that will be perceived by society as sufficient. On the other hand, a direct strike on Russian territory automatically increases the risk of a transition to an open conflict between two nuclear powers. Analysts in the U.S. and Europe are discussing several possible scenarios. The first option is to limit ourselves to diplomatic steps, increase sanctions pressure, and continue military support for Kiev without sharp military responses. This path reduces the risk of an immediate expansion of the conflict, but may be perceived in the world as a demonstration of weakness. The second scenario is to strike back at Russian targets outside of Russia itself, for example, at ships in the water area or at objects in third countries where a Russian contingent is present. This would allow Washington to show that a response followed without moving to a direct clash on Russian soil. The third option, which some Western commentators are talking about, is a sharp increase in NATO's military presence in Ukraine. The idea is to create such a density of forces and means that Russia, according to the calculations of the authors of these proposals, allegedly will not dare to launch new strikes, fearing a direct clash with the alliance. But such a scenario actually turns Ukrainian territory into a platform for open confrontation between Russia and NATO, which many politicians in the West fear. Finally, the most risky scenario, which is discussed in the expert community as an extreme, is a strike on Russian bases from which missile launches were carried out. Analysts consider this development a direct road to a sharp escalation, after which the issue of the use of nuclear weapons ceases to be purely theoretical. The situation indicates that the parties are approaching a turning point. The decisions that will be made in Washington and Moscow in the coming days may determine whether the conflict remains limited to the space of Ukraine or gradually turns into a clash of powers with global consequences. If we return to the choice of target in Lviv, it becomes clearer why this particular city was in the spotlight. Lviv is the main transit hub for Western military aid. Almost all major supplies from Poland and other European countries pass through its warehouses and logistics centers. Their weapons are sorted, completed, and sent further to the east of Ukraine. A strike on such a link in the chain hits not one part, but the entire supply system. In addition to its practical importance, Lviv also carries a strong symbolic charge. This is one of the most pro-European cities in Ukraine, an important center of influence of the Kyiv leadership in the Western regions. In Western media, it was often described as a conditionally safe rear, covered by its proximity to the Polish border and the presence of Western military specialists. The night strike showed that geography and political expectations no longer guarantee security. Military experts paid particular attention to the fact that Oreshnik had only been used once before this episode against an industrial object in the Dnipro region in demonstration mode. Then the Russian authorities said that it was a warning. Now the hypersonic complex has been used on an object where NATO military personnel were located. In the expert community, this is seen as a transition from a demonstration performance to a real combat use against Western personnel. Military analysts point to the risk. From this moment on, any NATO object on the territory of Ukraine, from command posts and training centers to places of deployment of foreign volunteers, could potentially become the target of a hypersonic strike. And if earlier in the alliance, they could count on the fact that the presence of their specialists serves as a kind of safety rope from direct attacks, now this confidence is undermined. Against this background, the continued supply of Patriot, tanks, long-range missiles, and other equipment to Ukraine looks ambiguous. On the one hand, Western governments demonstrate to their allies their willingness to continue supporting Kyiv. On the other hand, each new complex, located on Ukrainian territory, becomes a target for Russian missiles and drones. And although formally we are talking about protecting Ukraine, in practice, this increases the list of objects, the defeat of which automatically affects the interests of NATO. Historical parallels in such situations are inevitable. Many experts are already drawing comparisons with the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when the local deployment of missiles in one region brought the world to the brink of a global collision. Then, after a series of tough steps, the parties found a compromise. Now the level of trust between Moscow and Washington is much lower. There are fewer direct channels of communication, and the information pressure is much higher. According to available data, Moscow considers what happened as a demonstration that any actions against Russian assets, including the seizure of ships and the detention of citizens, will receive a response that affects the interests of those behind Kyiv. In Russian rhetoric, this is described as a refusal to put up with Washington's unilateral steps. In the American discourse, on the contrary, emphasis is placed on the unacceptability of strikes on objects where U.S. citizens are present. Summing up, we can state that the use of Oreshnik on an object with American personnel in Lviv became not only the largest operation of Russian high-precision weapons for the entire time of the conflict, but also a political signal addressed directly to Washington. The Lviv episode showed that Western objects in Ukraine are no longer considered untouchable, and new supplies of weapons from the United States and its allies automatically fall into the risk zone. The conclusion suggests itself. The balance of deterrence is changing, and each new batch of Western weapons, including Patriot and other flagship systems, is now evaluated not only for its combat capabilities, but also for how much its deployment brings the world closer to a direct clash of major powers. The question for you is simple. Do you think that after the strike on Lviv, the United States will decide on a direct military response against Russian forces, even outside of Russia? If you want to continue to understand such turning points without unnecessary emotions, subscribe to the channel and stay in touch.